From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. I haven't spoken with you for quite a while now. I took several months off, and who knows what the future holds. But I felt I needed to come in for one episode here, at least, to talk to you about the election, which is now 6 days away. I'm recording this on Wednesday, November 2nd. And if you're sick of hearing about the election, I don't blame you. But the problem is, what you're hearing about the election, even though it seems like a lot, it's a very narrow and distorted view. And my credo around here is always to talk about what I feel needs to be talked about, what's missing. So that's what I'm going to try to do for you today. What's missing from the conversation? Well, I don't think there's been a direct appeal to non-voters, sometimes voters, folks who consider themselves independents, who just don't know where to go. They're disgusted with both parties. And so I want to talk to you. I also want to talk to those who self-identify as Republicans or typically vote R on the ballot in a way that you haven't been spoken to. You've been hollered at and spoken down to, and you've been by the Democrats, and you've been lied to by the Republican office holders and candidates. So my audience today, traditional Republican voters, non-voters, independents, and I can tell you that I'm not a Democrat. I am absolutely not a Republican. I am absolutely not a Democrat. So you should know that going in. All right, so we go into this midterm election, which is vitally important. That's the first thing I'm going to say. For those of you who have become cynical, elections don't matter, well, I'm just going to try to convince you that you're wrong about that. At least this time. There have been other times when you may have been right, when the two parties weren't quite so divided. You may have been right about that. Republicans and Democrats just, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, all of that. But not this time. No, it's way too important this time. We've all heard about the big lie. We all know what the big lie is, that the 2020 election was stolen. If you genuinely believe that, I don't think there's anything I can tell you. Just go find another podcast. I don't know what to tell you. It's a lie. It's funny. Newscasters, networks, the major newspapers, just all the entire news media, except for the very, very extreme fringe, never ever used the word lie. Until just a few years ago. It was verboten to use the word lie in your reporting. Well, that's now completely just turned on its head. Not because the media generally has become lefty, the so-called liberal media. Again, if that's what you believe, I'm not sure I can convince you in time for this vote. For this midterm election in 6 days, or depending on when you're listening to this, in 5 or 4 or 3 or 2 or 1 day. So that's the big lie. The election was stolen. And it has defined the Republican Party pretty much. Well, let me take away the pretty much. It has defined the Republican Party. The great majority of Republican voters who are polled agree with that. Of course, the Orange Menace is sticking to that story, and he's making it a condition for any candidates he endorses. And he's had quite a lot of success with that, to the point where most Republican candidates at all levels, from Senate governorships down to city councils and school boards, it's a litmus test. You pretty much have to fall into that category of openly defying the legitimacy of the 2020 election, or at the very least, you just keep mum about it. So that defines the Republican Party, and that's the big lie. But there's even a bigger lie, I would say, that doesn't get enough attention. And that is that the Democratic Party is somehow this radical leftist cabal that's going to transform America or destroy America. Now, here, you don't have to be a card-carrying extremist right-winger. I hear this from regular folks that, yes, perhaps, the former president, the Orange Menace, is, a bit crazy and narcissistic and probably not very honest, and he's odd in a lot of ways. And, of course, they condemn January 6th. And these are very reasonable people. At least they appear very reasonable. I think maybe they are. But somehow they've been convinced by the even bigger lie that paints Democrats as these foaming at the mouth communists who are out to destroy America. And part of that is the whole wokeism thing. I don't know if I want to get into any of that today. I will mention, I guess I'll mention it here and just get it out of the way. If you're concerned with the so-called woke agenda, I'm sorry, I'm here to tell you that's just not true. I challenge you to find one candidate, one Democratic candidate at any level, from Senate to governor to city council to school board. I challenge you to find one who has any sort of so-called woke issues at the top of their agenda. They don't care. They're not out there promoting books to convince your 8-year-old to change their gender. It's just not happening. Yeah, the so-called woke issues, rights for transgenders, critical race theory, which is bogus and made up. All of that stuff is out there, but you have to go find it. You have to go find these little anecdotal stories, and then what right-wingers will do is they'll take that story and then they'll try to paint the whole Democratic Party with that one little extreme story happening in some neighborhood of San Francisco or something. It's just not an issue. Now, that's not to belittle these issues. Trans rights and gay and lesbian rights and Black history and all of this stuff, it's part of the never-ending evolution of America. There's always this push and this pull for progress, as most people see it, or threats, as other people see it, of minority rights and changing mores. That's always going to be part of the American story. And the so-called woke issues are just part of that. But they don't define the Democratic Party. It's not even close. That's just a tactic. That's just rhetoric. That's just more than rhetoric. It's part of the biggest lie. Again, the big lie is the so-called theft of the 2020 election. But the even bigger lie that I'm trying to convince you about right now is the way Democrats are portrayed. I'm not a Democrat, but I am going to defend them today. They're absolutely not radical leftists. They are not socialists. They are not communists. Even the furthest left you can go in the Democratic Party, by any standard, is just so reasonably centrist on any reasonable scale. Bernie Sanders, for God's sakes, is a downright moderate, if not conservative, on guns. The poster child, the boogie person, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, her whole Green New Deal agenda is all based on capitalism. It's based on government and corporate cooperation. It's based on private enterprise. It's based on the profit system. If you know anything about these initiatives, it's all about corporations being good citizens, and in none of this does she expect them to give up their profits. If she was a real socialist, she would want to nationalize the energy sector. She would want to nationalize the agribusiness sector. She doesn't want any of that. Nobody in the Democratic Party wants that. Not even close. So there's absolutely nothing socialist or communist about the Democrats. And if that's your fear, casual voters, non-voters, people who are reasonable and they understand January 6th was terrible, and yes, they wanted everybody to get along. They're just nice folks. But they vote Republican because they're convinced that the Democrats are even worse, because they're radical, frothing at the mouth communists who are going to destroy America. If you believe that, you've been had. And I know that's not easy to hear. So in these few days here until the election, I just wanted to get in your ear one last time and beg you to vote. If you're planning to sit this one out, please, for the love of God, don't sit this out. If you are a true lefty, if you're a socialist, if you're a real, legitimate lefty, like doesn't exist in the Democratic Party, and that's your reason not to vote, I'm asking you to vote. I'm asking you to hold, that's what I'm doing. I'm holding my nose and voting for the Democrats. I can't stand the Democrats. They're completely ruled by corporate elites. They're weak. They're ineffectual. They don't know how to put up a good fight. They put up lousy candidates. They're mealy-mouthed. They're afraid. I can't stand the Democrats, but I'm going to hold my nose and I'm going to vote for every Democrat on my ballot because there's just no other choice. So to my lefty friends who hate the Democrats, all right, I understand, but you got to vote for them this time. You just have to. For my non-voters and casual voters and sometime voters, and those who are going to vote Republican because the Democrats are worse, I'm telling you, I'm here to tell you today, I'm going to try to convince you in these last few days, you can't vote for a Republican, and you can't sit it out. All right, why can't you vote for Republicans? Well, the biggest reason is one you've heard, and maybe you just, I don't know, you don't believe it? I can't entertain the notion that you haven't heard about this. You know about January 6th, right? I mean, you know about everything surrounding January 6th. All the efforts, all the legal efforts, all the behind-the-scenes efforts to literally overturn a democratic election in the United States. The fake electors trying to convince Vice President Pence to defy the Constitution and not accept the Biden electors. I mean, this was part of a pattern that we saw for the whole 4 years of the Orange Menace administration, where he knew what he was doing was illegal. Yeah, I know it's against the law to bribe Zelensky regarding this sort of tit-for-tat military aid for finding dirt on the Bidens in Ukraine, for example. He said, yeah, I know it's illegal. Just do it. Do it anyway. We'll fight it in court. He did this on several fronts. And that was his argument, trying to overturn the election. Yeah, sure, it's illegal, but we have the court system on our side. I've appointed all these judges. I've got Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. We'll just take our chances in court. And at the risk of just repeating things you already know, I'm thinking of my audience today. I want to talk to casual voters. Maybe you don't know this. The Orange Menace's call to the Secretary of State of Georgia, Raffensperger, was unsuccessful because Raffensperger refused to break the law. He said, Mr. President, I can't do it. Raffensperger has come out publicly. He's very clear about it. He's a very conservative Republican. He voted for the Orange Menace. But he said, I'm sorry, Mr. President, I can't just go find you 11,788 votes. It's not within my any legal means to do that. So the only reason the coup was unsuccessful is because largely Republicans, there are other cases too, Arizona, Wisconsin. It's like, I'm sorry, we can't do it. It's not legal. What you're asking me to do isn't legal. Well, all right. So Republicans got the message. Okay, well, if we couldn't do it this time, we've got to be able to do it next time. So we'll make it legal. So they go in and literally enact laws at the state level that will make these kind of maneuvers doable. And they've done that. And they even want to do more. And by they, I mean Republican state legislators at the behest of the National Party, they're all on the same page here, are proposing and enacting laws that will quite literally take your vote away. Now, this isn't hyperbole. This isn't political spin. This is simple fact. They want to change the election laws in their states to put all the power in the state legislature itself. They don't have to accept the popular vote. They can send to the federal government, they can send to Washington a slate of electors of their choosing. And as we speak, they are enacting laws that allow them to do that, or at least debating them, so that any state with a Republican majority in their legislature, like here in Wisconsin, where I'm talking to you from, they can ignore the popular vote in their state. They can choose their own electors legally now because they've changed the law. And if they have a Republican governor, which is right now the Republican candidate, an election denier, the Republican candidate for governor here in Wisconsin has a slight lead in the polls as I speak to you. So now, if he wins in the next election, then the legislature can choose their own electors. Their now Republican governor, an election denier, will sign off on it, and off that slate of electors goes to Washington. No laws broken. They found a legal loophole. They found a way to do it. Let's say, just for the sake of the illustration here, let's say 2024 is a rematch of Biden and the Orange Menace, which is quite likely. And say Biden wins by 1 percentage point, or 2 percentage points, or 3 percentage points. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because the Republicans are ready for it. And this is happening in state after state. Every state with a Republican legislature is working on this. Now, I'm not even talking about the issues yet. And there again, if you're a conservative, if I'm, and I really hope I'm talking to some conservatives here, your basic run-of-the-mill conservatives, and even maybe a little extreme. Maybe you do think that the so-called woke agenda has gone too far, and maybe you think that women's rights and gay and lesbian rights and CRT and all of that has gone too far, and you want to pull that back. You're very conservative. So you say, well, okay, everything you're describing to me about how they so-called steal elections is actually okay with me, because at least it's my side stealing the elections, and I'm going to get what I want on the issues. All right, now I just have to ask you to just search your own heart, search your own conscience. I'll turn it around. I'll ask myself, okay, if somehow, if there was a party out there that I could identify with, and currently there's not, but just suppose I could get most everything I want policy-wise, but the price I would have to pay, or is it a price? The only way I can get it is by my party quite literally taking away the Democratic vote, small d democracy. And I guess that's the question you have to ask yourself. What's more important to you? Winning on policy, getting what you want, or continuing to live in a democracy. Now, I can hear you already. Oh, we don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic. All right, I don't want to have that whole argument with you. I think I want to assume, at least for the moment, you want to vote, don't you? Do you want to vote? Let's just put it in the simplest terms. Do you want to vote? And do you want your vote to matter? Do you think that should be a thing? Put aside the whole semantic, political theory conversations about democracy versus republic versus all. Just put that away for a minute. I'm just asking you a very simple question. Do you want to vote for the candidate of your choice? Do you think that's important? Do you want your vote to count? And are you willing to give that up to win on your policies? Now, if anybody asks themselves that question, I'll ask myself that question right now. Okay, again, this fictional party that doesn't exist, but they represent all of my policy stands, okay? Would I be willing to give up my vote, my right to participate, if I was getting what I wanted from that party? Boy, that's when you have to be brave. Now you're into profile of courage kind of territory. Because I have to admit that, that makes me think, wait a minute, you're going to give me everything I want? This party in power is going to achieve everything that I'm looking for? And all I have to do is give up my right to have a voice. I just have to give up my vote. Well, I would like to, I don't have that opportunity. This is a hypothetical. I would like to think I'd make the right choice. I hope I would make the right choice and choose democracy and choose my right to be represented, to have a vote. Well, what you're facing right now, if you identify as a Republican, if you have a tradition of voting Republican, you or your family, if you consider yourself an independent who often votes Republican because you don't like the Democrats, you do have this choice. It's not a hypothetical for you. Because I'm telling you, if you choose to vote for a Republican at any level in this upcoming election, from senator, governor, House of Representatives, state legislature, city council, school board, if you decide to fill in the bubble next to anybody with an R, you are making that choice. And that's why I'm asking you today to please don't do that. Please choose a representative democracy. That's what's on the ballot. All the other issues be damned. There's only one issue on the ballot. Are we going to continue to live in a representative democracy or a democratic republic, whatever you want to call it? Or are we going to live in a nation where a handful of party elites, and that's what it is, it's literally just a handful. There are 538 representatives in Congress? Half of them are Republicans. So that's what? I can't do math in my head. 538 divided by 2. Help me. About 270, something like that. And about 2/3 of those are really hardcore right-wing election denier types. So less than 200. Just controlling everything. Making every decision about everything. Making literally every political decision. Because once you put them in power, they're in charge. And depending on the size of your state or city or county, you might have literally a half a dozen people. Maybe a dozen, maybe 50, I don't know. In a state of millions. That's the decision you have to make on Tuesday when you walk into the polls. Even if you think you're getting what you want, the price is too high. And all of this balances on 2 points that I'm trying to convince you about today. Number one, the Republican Party, as it currently exists, I'm talking about the lawmakers. I'm not talking about the run-of-the-mill voter out there. I'm not talking about the guy from Sheboygan who has an R next to his name. I'm talking about the people with power. They are quite ready and equipped, in some cases already on the job, of destroying your vote. They're already doing it. My case today rests on the notion that I can convince you that that's true. Look at all the evidence. And the second point that my argument rests on, and the second point that's required for you to come along with me here, is this whole notion of Democrats being radical, leftist, communist destroyers of America. That's the biggest lie of them all. Because even if you buy everything else, you'll say to me, well, you know what? Okay, it's bad out there, but the Democrats are even worse. They're going to destroy America. We're going to become Venezuela. That is such a ridiculous lie that it's difficult to respond to. It's simply not true. I mean, prove me wrong. Show me where I'm wrong without using the hyperbolic messaging of Republican candidates. So casual voters, non-voters, conservative voters who traditionally vote Republican, you can't do it this time. You just can't. If you're a conservative, that's fine. I welcome a broad political spectrum. I think there should be debate. I think there should be people on the right, on the left. Everybody's welcome. I'm old-fashioned that way. I think America, for all of its problems, that's one thing that I want to maintain. Yeah, let's have a debate. That's fine. You should have a place in the political discourse. But you have to draw the line somewhere on that political line, on the political spectrum. Well, I draw the line at destroying democracy. I draw the line at armed insurrection of the Capitol building. I draw the line at maneuvering and manipulating the system in such a way that representative democracy literally no longer exists, at least not in any real way. You know, they have elections in Iran. They have elections in Russia. Most authoritarian states have elections. I think even North Korea has elections. We'll continue to have elections, but they'll be a sham. Well, you say, the last one was a sham. All the irregularities. There again, you've just been brainwashed. Show me the evidence. Show me 1 ounce of evidence. And again, I'm not talking to the hardcore people right now. I know I can't reach them. I'm talking to you, a reasonable person who wants the best for the country, wants the best for you and your family. And if that describes you, then I'm begging you, please, you cannot vote for anybody with an R next to their name anywhere on your ballot. You just can't do it. Not this time. If you want to have a conservative party, good luck to you. I hope the Republican Party can reconstitute itself somehow and purge all of the sort of fascist elements that have taken hold, all the racist elements that have taken hold. I haven't even talked about that, which we could, but you know, there's the whole Oath Keepers and the whole racist constituency of the Republican Party. Take yourself back to post-Civil War days, and maybe you were this devout Christian and you heard about this new organization, the KKK, and they sold themselves as a Christian organization with a mission to celebrate and preserve great Christian heritage. And you thought that sounded pretty good. But pretty soon they're riding horses and burning crosses and they're hanging people from trees. And wouldn't at some point in that process you'd say, I guess I'm not part of that organization. I guess I need to distance myself from that group. I need to disown that group. I'm still a Christian. I'm still a believer. But I'm not going to belong to that particular organization. Well, what about an organization who brings gallows to the Capitol and chants, "Hang Mike Pence," and an organization that openly supports white supremacists and openly supports the manipulation of law to disenfranchise you and your vote. At some point, don't you say, yeah, I'm still a conservative, but I can't belong to that organization? At some point, don't you do that? I'm asking you today to do that. And if your only reason for not doing that so far is because your fear of the evil communist, radical, leftist Democrats, that's the biggest lie of them all. They're so mainstream. They're so tame. You can disagree with them. You don't have to fear them. There's nothing to fear. I don't know how it's all going to work itself out in the wash here. I don't know how the Republican Party is either going to save itself or it's going to wither and die at some point and something else rises up. That's way beyond my ability to forecast. And that's a conversation we can continue to have. All I'm here today is to beg you, if you're early voting now or if you go on election day, you got to hold your nose. If you don't like the Democrats, I don't like the Democrats. I'm holding my nose, and I'm voting for them because the Republicans will basically end this nation as we know it. And that's not hyperbole. Oh, both sides say that. Yeah, but one side is right and one side is lying. When the Republicans say the Democrats will destroy America, they're just lying. When I say the Republicans will destroy America, I mean it quite literally, in the sense that, no, America will continue. You'll still get up and you'll go to work and things will happen and there'll be, but you will have lost your political voice. You will have lost your vote. Voting won't matter anymore. We'll have elections like they do in Russia or in North Korea or in Iran. But what about the economy? All right, well, okay, before I go, let's just run down the issues really quickly. Okay, because that's not really what this was about. But let's run down the major issues. For the Republicans, it's all about the economy, which in itself is just a term I think should be outlawed. Nobody knows what they mean, the economy, like it's this big god floating around. If you're talking about jobs, well, unemployment is very low right now. If you're talking about wages, they've gone up, but then they've been blamed for causing the inflation. And if you're talking about inflation, geez, man, just lie after lie after lie. There's political spin, sure, but then there are things that are just ridiculous. Like Joe Biden caused inflation. Now, if you think that's true, you just don't know what's going on. Go to any independent, reputable economist, and they'll tell you, yeah, you know what? The stimulus package, the COVID spending, any reputable independent economist will tell you that all of that spending, all of the stimulus spending, yeah, it had an impact on inflation, maybe 1 or 2 points, maybe. The rest of it, it's because of COVID. It's because of the disruption of the supply chain, which still hasn't been fixed. It's because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which disrupted energy pipelines and food and agriculture pipelines. There are lots of reasons, those being the biggest ones. And the real kicker is, what in the world are the solutions? It's a world problem. The United States is doing better than most other countries, actually, when it comes to inflation. Germany, UK, everybody, all of Europe, inflation rate higher than the United States. So to blame Biden is just a joke. It's just a lie and it's a joke. All right, so there's the blame side. Now, what do you do about it? Well, even here again, I challenge you. Find a solution that the Republicans are offering. Lower government spending. Some things haven't changed for decades with the Republican Party. How is that going to fight inflation? Connect the dots for me. It's not, because that depends on you believing the lie that Joe Biden and the Democratic Congress, their passage of government spending is the cause of inflation. First, you have to believe that lie in order to believe that cutting government spending would reduce inflation. It's just not true. It's just a lie. Now, again, I'm not a Democrat by any stretch. Let's just be clear about that. But if you do consider yourself a run-of-the-mill sort of pragmatic, common sense American, and you're just looking at it, well, you believe that economic growth is a good thing. Generally speaking, you look on any graph, you look at the timeline, the so-called economy is always better under Democrats. Again, this is your system, not mine. I'm not buying into any of this. We'll talk about my ideas another time, and if you listen to the program, you know what they are. But if you believe that economic growth is a good thing, well, then you want to vote for Democrats. If you want wages to grow, then you want to vote for a Democrat. If you want gas prices to come down, well, it doesn't matter who you vote for because a president, a Congress can't do anything about gas prices. It's a global commodity. You can't do anything about gas prices. You can't do much about inflation. Again, it's a global phenomenon. So what Biden and his Democrats have suggested, okay, they don't come right out and say it because that would be suicide. Well, that's out of our hands. Inflation, we can't do anything about inflation. Well, that's the truth, and they know it. So instead, what they do, quite rightly, is say, okay, the silent part, we can't do anything about inflation. So here's the out loud part. All right, well, we can reduce taxes for working people. We can do what we did in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, reducing the cost of prescription drugs. Some of them have proposed an excess profits tax from these corporations, because obviously that's one of the many reasons for inflation. Again, not the entire reason, but a great bulk of the reason is the fact that corporations are just shattering records for profits in the last couple of quarters. Really since COVID. They've taken advantage of every opportunity. And they're using inflation as a cover to say, well, we have to raise our prices because inflation. And at the same time, they're making billions, trillions of dollars and shattering their own records for profits. And shareholders are doing great. The owner class is doing great. So Democrats suggest taxing the top 1%. They excessive profits tax, windfall taxes. So I'm not necessarily saying these are all good ideas, but they're doing what they can. I have other ideas on what to do, but they're too radical for anybody to hear. So, as I've said many times, I'm not a Democrat. I think these are all mamby-pamby responses and will have little to no effect, but at least they're trying. Maybe they'll have some effect, as opposed to the Republicans. And what's their economic platform? Year after year, decade after decade. Lower regulation, no minimum wage, no limit on profits, lower taxes for corporations and rich folks because trickle down. And again, I ask you to find that independent, unaffiliated economist who will tell you that trickle down works. That's done. That cake is baked. We all know, unless you're a wild-eyed partisan, we all know that trickle down never worked. Never worked. So for the Republicans to be running on the economy and for voters to be falling for this is just so sad. The other big issue Republicans are running on is crime, which violent crime is actually down. Did you know that? It ticked up a little bit in 2020. It ticked down a little bit in 2021. Now, homicides are up. But if you look at the graph from 70s, 80s, there was a big spike in it went up and up and up in the 80s until it hit the 90s, and then we were just in the stratosphere. And gee, I wonder what happened in the 80s. No attention at all to income inequality. Income inequality just skyrocketed in the 80s. The so-called war on drugs, total failure. And then we get into the 90s. Then we got the crime legislation from Clinton Gore, 100,000 cops. That's when things peaked. And then a steady, precipitous decline. ever since. And now in the last 2 years, a slight uptick. And so the whole issue, crime is out of control, cities are burning. It's just more lies. And to the extent that it's true, in the last couple of years, well, there has been a rise in homicide. There's been even a greater rise in suicide. Those two lines on the graph go pretty much parallel in their rise. So what does that tell you? It tells you that deaths have little to do with crime. Yes, of course, homicide is a crime. But the point is, it's about guns. And it's about lack of resources and lack of opportunity. And people thrown away and people falling through the cracks. The very idea that we can get tough on crime and have more cops and all, it's just more lies. But then again, this gets into policy that I promised I wouldn't really get into. This is just to say that Republicans have taken this particular campaign way beyond political spin. These are just not true. I don't know if it's happening in your state. Here in my state, especially we got Tony Evers, the current Democratic governor, going against the Republican challenger, and we've got Mandela Barnes, Democratic challenger, going against a Republican senator. And one of the very biggest issues, maybe the biggest, that you see in all the ads on television and online are about crime, but specifically about parole boards and cash bail. Are you guys getting this where you live too? And again, it's just lies. The fact checkers, pants on fire kind of stuff. The Republican challenger for governor is accusing Governor Evers, of releasing murderers and rapists. Where it's just the state parole board doing what all state parole boards do. It's the same all over the country, and it has been for forever. There is such a thing as parole. And yeah, some guy who's 80 years old who killed his girlfriend in a murder of passion when they were both 20. Now 60 years later, he gets out on parole. Because that's just the way the system works. And then, but this candidate for governor runs an ad. He let this terrible murderer out, making you unsafe. It's just ridiculous. It's just, again, it's so beyond political spin to the point of just blatant lying. And then in the Senate race, our Republican senator is accusing Mandela Barnes of eliminating bail. Well, this is too complicated to get into. I know John Oliver just did a whole program on it, on cash bail. Well, again, it's too complicated for us to get into, but simply put, it's just kind of an unfair system where if you have a lot of money, you can get out of jail. You can buy your get out of jail card. That's cash bail. Lay down the cash, you're out on bail. If you don't have a lot of money, well, you're stuck. While your case is being adjudicated, you're in a cell, man. That's just all there is to it. So there's a movement for reform regarding cash bail because that's just blatantly, obviously unfair that a person with money can go home while their trial can go on for, these trials go on for months, years sometimes. And a person of no means or little means can't do that. So there's a debate about reforming cash bail. And that's all Mandela Barnes was ever talking about. But Ron Johnson, our Republican senator, just blatantly lies about it. He wants to let dangerous criminals out. He wants to eliminate bail. Of course he doesn't. In any discussion of bail reform, it's based on whether someone is dangerous or not based on how much money they have. It's just, again, Democrats generally are so freaking reasonable. They're so pragmatic. They're so middle of the road. It's one of the reasons I don't like them. They're just so annoyingly reasonable all the time. So I'm begging you to vote. You got to vote for a Democrat this time. I'm not a Democrat, but you have to. You just have to. Republicans will legislate the end of democracy. That's not hyperbole, that's a fact. They say it themselves. The Republican candidate for governor here in Wisconsin just said, I think yesterday, in a speech, he said, if once I'm elected governor, the Republicans will never lose another election in this state. They just come out and say it. They just come right out and say it. That same candidate said he endorses the 1849 abortion law here in Wisconsin, which has no exceptions for rape or incest, which puts doctors and nurses in jail. He will uphold that abortion ban, that 1849 law. Again, we don't have to make things up. And there again, there's a difference between the two parties. As much as I hate both of them, there's definitely a scale here. And the Democrats, or I shouldn't say Democrats, anybody opposing the Republicans, which includes myself, we don't have to make things up. We don't have to make things up. They say it themselves. No plan for inflation, as we talked about, except lower taxes for the rich and the trickle-down lie. They come right out and say they want to end Social Security, basically. They want to privatize it, or they want to put it up on the chopping block every couple of years. Again, Ron Johnson, my senator, says it right out loud. We don't have to make things up about them. Guns. Even though the American people favor reasonable gun laws in the 70, 80, 90 percentile, especially universal background checks, never happen with Republicans. And I've gone this whole time and I haven't even mentioned climate, another reason to hate both parties. Neither one of them has said a damn word about the climate. Not one. When it's at the top of the list for me. Or maybe number 2 now, right under saving democracy, because if we don't save democracy, everything else is lost. So again, even if you're a conservative, even if you're just a moderate conservative or not that political, you're going to want your lawmakers to do something about climate change, don't you? Can I assume that much about you, that you're at least a normal person? Not word one about climate. It doesn't even come up in the damn debates. The moderators don't even bring it up. Lord mercy. And then the whole area of civil rights that we mentioned earlier, LGBTQ plus rights, Black Americans. I mean, I guess the good news is, I used to put this forward as good news. I'm not sure it is good news anymore. Of the U.S. population, only about 10 to 20% are hardcore MAGA. So that used to make me feel good. Well, okay, we outnumber them by a mile. It's really literally about 10 to 20% are hardcore. Like, yeah, storm the Capitol. But the problem is, you can reverse that in the halls of Congress and state legislatures, where it's more like 80%, and that really, it might as well be 100% then, because even the ones who aren't hardcore, who use moderate language, they're still voting together. They're all voting together. So virtually 100% of lawmakers at every level are hardcore MAGA. Again, even the ones some of them 10 to 20%, 20% of them probably, maybe even 25%, are kind of dragged along. They're trying to be moderate. They're trying to be old school. They're trying to say the right things. They're trying to say, let's work across the aisle, But they have no choice. And in the end, they wind up voting together 100%. You've noticed that about Republicans, right? They vote in a block at every level. Go to your school board. Go to your city council. Go to your state legislature. Of course, we see it in House of Representatives and the Senate. They vote together. Yes or no, 100%. They are in lockstep. So even though only 10 to 20% of the U.S. population as a whole are hardcore MAGA, 100% of Republicans in office are 100% hardcore MAGA. That means election denying, all the things I talked about. Manipulating state and federal laws so that there's never a fair election again. We do become, at least in that realm of having sham elections, then we do become Russia or North Korea or Iran. And yeah, you'll still have your good old American cookouts on July 4th, and life won't look that different, I suppose, at least not at first. But we just won't have that anymore. And then, in worst case scenario, your little cookout might be attacked by political violence. I don't want to get into that. I don't know where the political violence is going to go. That scares the hell out of me. That's a real possibility. I mean, we've already seen it, obviously, with January 6th. We've seen it in Charlotte. We've seen it in various Sikh temple and the Jewish temple, and now just recently with the attempted assassination or at least kidnapping of Nancy Pelosi. So I don't know where that's going. But that's where we are. And we're a few days out from election, and I'm telling you, I'm begging you, if you're somebody who's voted for Republicans in the past, I'm not going to jump on you for that. But you can't do it this time. You just can't. I'm begging you. If you want to be a conservative, I'm not going to have that fight today. Be a conservative. In fact, I'm never going to have that fight. You have the right to be a conservative. I think we should all be at the table and we should hash these things out. But the current Republican Party is unacceptable and you can't vote for them, and I'm begging you. If you think voting doesn't matter, I'm begging you, please, this once. Here in Wisconsin, you can register right up until and on Election Day. Every state has different rules about this, but I know in Wisconsin, where I am, you can register on Election Day, so there's no excuse. If you're a non-voter, if you're a casual voter, if you're a sometimes voter, please. If you're a young voter, God, we need you. All right, so there's my plea. There's my plea. So once again, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. We don't really do this show anymore. At least I haven't done it for several months. Maybe I'll get back into the swing of it. But I hope you heard this one, and I hope you'll follow my advice, and I hope that you'll vote. I hope you'll vote on Tuesday, November 8th. All right, I love you. Take care.